Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Grey Matter, which I have entitled The Candidate. Many people, including myself, consider the next provincial election, which will likely occur sometime next year, as perhaps the most important one in Alberta's 117-year history. There's a great deal at stake. The province is still reeling from disastrous policies that were put into place during the Notley Gang's 4-year government. And if they are restored to power, most everyone agrees that a disaster will be even furthered. Their vision of Alberta includes drastic lockdown COVID policies, which they are still advocating, signing on to non-scientific climate hysteria, which is expressed as socialist economic policy, and on and on and on. And so the current leadership race for the leadership of the UCP party is a crucial one for Alberta. And today, it's my pleasure to have on the program one of the three front runners in that leadership race, Mr. Brian Jean. This is going to be a conversation which hopefully will inform our listeners about why Brian is running and what his ideas are, what his vision for Alberta is under his leadership. So as we always do, we're going to start the conversation by framing it in terms of a few quotations. The first one is not aimed at Brian, but perhaps aimed at some of the leaders that we have right now. It's from Thomas Jefferson. And he's quoted as writing, "Whenever a man has cast a longing eye on offices, a rottenness begins in their conduct." The second one is from Abraham Lincoln. And I would say that this one applies certainly to Mr. Kenney and Mr. Trudeau. "Be with the leader when he is right, stay with him when he is still right, but leave him when he is wrong." And finally, for a dose of humor, we can always turn to Mark Twain. He was quoted as saying, "Politicians and diapers must be changed often and for the same reason." So who do we have on the show today? Well, Brian Jean. Brian is a veteran politician and lawyer. He has served as the member of the Legislative Assembly for Fort McMurray-Lac La Biche since March 16th of 2022. He was also formerly the leader of the opposition, the last leader of the Wildrose Party from 2015 to 2017 before its merger into the United Conservative Party. He was also a member of Parliament with the Conservative Party from 2004 to 2014 before entering provincial politics. Brian also worked as a lawyer in Fort McMurray for many years before he was elected to Parliament, where he represented Athabasca from 2004 to 2006 and Fort McMurray-Athabasca from 2006 to 2014 when he resigned from the House of Commons. He returned to political life in February of 2015 when he announced that he would seek the leadership of Wildrose Party. He was elected leader of that party in March of that year. And in the 2015 provincial election, he was elected in the provincial riding of Fort McMurray-Conklin and became the leader of the opposition, as I said. He ceased to lead the Wildrose Party when it merged with the Progressive Conservatives to become the United Conservative Party in 2017. He ran to be leader of that new party in a somewhat controversial campaign, losing to Jason Kenney. He resigned his seat in the Alberta legislature in March of 2018. He returned to provincial politics after winning a by-election in March of this year. And upon Mr. Kenney's resignation announcement on May 18th, 2022, Brian declared his candidacy to become the next leader. Brian is a father, a grandfather, and a husband. He's a proud Albertan and describes himself as a huge defender of our energy industry and his hometown of Fort McMurray. He's lived in Alberta almost his entire life, moving here from BC as a small child. He's the youngest of 11, which is a sign of his determination, certainly. Brian grew up doing the sorts of things that boys do in rural Alberta. He became an accomplished outdoorsman, hunter, and athlete. If you ask Brian about education, he will tell you the most important things in life are learned through work and from your family. He will tell you that his father and his mother were his best role models and educators. Young Brian didn't take school all that seriously. At Prairie Bible High School, playing hockey excited him more than classes. That said, as a young man, Brian got a Bachelor of Science degree and came back to Fort McMurray from his studies in the U.S. to work in several of the family businesses. and he worked in a variety of them, and he is proud of how much he remembers from the sales lessons he learned from Xerox in the 80s. Brian then decided to attend law school in Australia, Bond University, where he was student president while getting a law degree and an MBA. Brian returned to Canada, got his Canadian law equivalency at the University of Calgary, went on to practice law for a decade, and was one of the busiest litigators in Northern Alberta before entering politics. During this time, he became ever more active in his community and participated in a number of leadership positions in the Chamber of Commerce and other charitable work. In 2004, Brian ran for office for the first time, as we said, and became the Member of Parliament for Fort McMurray-Lac La Biche. So, Brian, thank you very much for being part of Grey Matter today.
Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for some time to find out more about your vision for Alberta and why you're running for leadership. Perhaps that's a good place to start. I mean, obviously, you've had a very successful career as a politician, as a lawyer, and as a businessman, and obviously left politics in 2018 under upsetting circumstances, disappointing circumstances. Those of us who lived in Alberta at that time were aware of some of the controversy surrounding that leadership campaign, which resulted in Mr. Kenney becoming leader of the party, the new party. What was it that made you decide to re-enter politics and to become an MLA again?
I clearly saw the NDP becoming a serious force in Alberta in politics, and a competitor like that needs to make sure it has a very strong competitor on the other side, because I believe conservative policies are better. I believe conservative principles get us better governments, and as long as those governments stay accountable to the people, stay honest, I think they deliver much better outcomes. And for me, it's all about outcomes. I have a very rounded past, I would say. I've got a political past, a legal past, and a business past, and I've done a lot of community work for charitable organizations. I like community. I think it's important, but I also recognize right now, I don't think there could be a more important time to get involved in politics, as you said. Right now, we've seen a leader that was detached from the people, detached from its base, detached from its membership. And that's why I came back. That's why I wanted to get involved again, because I wanted to renew the UCP in order to beat the NDP in the next election. And without renewing it, I saw clearly in my mind that it wasn't going to be successful.
One of the things that I really like about your platform, if I understand it correctly, is you talk a lot about the concept of autonomy, both individually and also as a province, giving people more control over their lives. That seems to be a very key part of your campaign. Why is it that this idea of autonomy is so central to your campaign?
Because I think that the better that individuals are, the stronger they are, the more in control of their lives they are, the happier they will be, the freer they will be. The freer we are, the happier we are. There's no question of that. And also, I believe the more prosperous we will be when we're free of the bondage of regulation and big government. I think the only way to get autonomy is through good conservative principles, like having more money in your pocket. How can you make decisions that give you autonomy without being able to make those decisions yourself? I don't think, and I don't believe in one size fits all. I believe that, the better options we have, the better outcomes people will have. And that's what it's all about for me. Government should provide better options.
As part of this concept of autonomy, are you talking also about bringing more local government as opposed to, obviously what we've seen in recent years is the growth of this expanding federal government that's reaching into every area of our lives. I think you'd agree from your experience as a legislator that most problems are better solved the closer they are to home. That is, local
Absolutely.
Government seems to do a much better job than a federal government that, as you say, is detached and really far away. Is that part of this concept of autonomy as you see it?
It is. Autonomy is not just for me about autonomy of oneself, which to me is extremely important. And the most important part of autonomy is me being in control of my own body. But also it's about autonomy of your profession, autonomy of your finances, being able to own your own home, rejecting the WAF, policies and what they stand for, but also communities, autonomy for your community, whether it's a Christian community, whether it's a Hindu community, all of those communities, whether they're believers or not believers, should have the ability to live their life as they see fit. And I think for me, that makes us all stronger, and especially more autonomy for Albertans within Canada is a clear winner for me, because there's some places in Alberta that people have more rights as citizens of other provinces than we do here in Alberta, and I think that's wrong. And we need an Alberta government that's going to fight for the same EI that we get in Newfoundland, or the same opportunity on babysitting or universal health care in Quebec or Ontario. And you know what's going on. There's only one way to solve this disparity and what's been taking place for years. We have to have a politician that has the political will to give notice under Section 46 of the Constitution and make it clear that Albertans are not happy that they've had a 62% referendum, and they want Alberta wants and Albertans want the rest of the provinces and the federal government to come to the table and talk about the things that are not working out so well for us, and to try to fix those things. And that's the only way we're going to be able to try to solve the situation and fix Canada. And I want to fix Canada. I know some people that have been on your show before don't, but with respect, I think they're wrong, and I don't mean that badly. I just mean they're wrong because I don't think enough Albertans truly feel as passionate about the situation as other Albertans. 20 to 30% of Albertans right now are in the zone, let's call it that, ready to divorce and go to the next level and go out and leave the rest of the country. Yeah. But I believe 70% of Albertans are not there. 30% sure, maybe even 40% could be persuaded one way or the other, but they're not there now. And I think as a result of that, we have to do what is best for Albertans, and that is get in front of the government, get in front of the other premiers, and have that discussion that they want to have. Right now, the premiers obviously are completely unhappy with healthcare funding from the federal government. They require all of these things to do for healthcare, but there's, when we're asking for the money, there's no money. They've all joined, almost all the provinces and territories have joined in the appeal on the pipeline ban, and I'm sure they'd want to. And any province that's not involved in that pipeline appeal should think their jurisdictional situation out, because they should be. And I hope they join us on the tanker ban appeal once Alberta launches that legislation against the federal government, and a whole bunch of other things. I think we have to show our strength. We have to pull out of the EI, the unemployment insurance situation, have our own unemployment insurance. We have to pull out of the pension plan, a federal one, and we'd have twice as much money for our seniors almost in our pension plan. Those are things that would be made in Alberta Solutions, that would be for Albertans, that would make a lot of sense. And frankly, that's what's going to get the federal government's attention when we pull money out of their coffers. And that's the only way we can do what we need to do. That's why I did the gas tax thing, by the way, the royalties. I don't know if you know that, but that's why I did that, is because it takes the money and it puts it in Albertans' pockets, or keeps it in Albertans' pockets, and doesn't send it to Ottawa for disbursement on equalization. I'm going to find a ton more of those opportunities where we can keep all the money in Alberta in Albertans' pockets instead of in government pockets.
Well, I'm glad you raised a lot there, and I want to sort of dive into some of these different topics that you raised. Recently, I read a piece that was published in the Western Standard, in which it quoted you as saying that you're confident you have the winning formula in the race to be premier. And one of the things that you talked about in that piece was this idea of taking some of the interest from surpluses that are coming and paying down distribution and transmission costs for Alberta families and seniors. Do you want to explain a little bit in more detail about how that would work?
For sure, I would love to. First of all, we're going to have surpluses over the next number of years, probably 4, hopefully 5 or 6. And those surpluses are going to be significant. They should be somewhere between $10 and $15 billion a year. And once we reach about 30 billion, just think on a conservative estimate, we would get about 6% return on investment. And we would use that 6%, which would equal about $1.8 billion, which would actually equate to about 1/3 of the transmission and distribution charges that Albertans pay on their bill. And we think that's only one of the many different options we want to find in a suite of options where Albertans will save money, not just having the government send them back money, which is does not help inflation. What we want to do is create situations where the gas prices go down, where the cost of living on a day-to-day basis goes down for seniors, for families, for all Albertans. And that's the best way to stop inflation and to keep more money in their pockets, as well as send less money to Ottawa.
One of the other things that was part of your, let's say, winning formula is talking about future invocations of a public emergency. And you've expressed concern about removal of rights automatically in such cases. And as I followed your campaign, you've been very, very concerned about the infringement of individual freedoms. I guess this ties into the whole autonomy concept. So what steps would you take to ensure, as the next premier of our province, what steps would you take to ensure that this doesn't happen again? For example, you might be aware that I'm one of the lawyers involved in a constitutional challenge over these lockdown measures, and I cross-examined Dr. Hinshaw for a few days. Section 38 of the Public Health Act actually makes her frighteningly the most powerful person in the history of our province. Those amendments were made not long after the pandemic emergency was declared in March of 2020, and they're still in place. And so at least on the books, there's black letter law that could bring all of this back. If you were premier, for example, would you consider repealing that or revoking those powers, rescinding them? Or how would you ensure that Albertans would not again be exposed to these infringements of their individual rights and freedoms?
Well, I don't want to get all boring and geeky, but what I would do is put an interpretation clause in both the Health Act and the Bill of Rights in particular to exclude one from the other, and make sure the interpretation is there so judges read it. They don't just decide for themselves that they're limited by the Charter 1 rights. Listen, the Alberta government can bind itself and can be more stringent than the Charter is, and that's what I want to do. I want to make sure that future governments don't do this ever again. And a number of things that I would like to do is not just make it very difficult for them to do so, but when they do it, if they ever do it, they recognize that they will be open to public scrutiny on their secret cabinet documents. None of that will happen. We will have public inquiries post-mortem, and as well have a process laid out for clear discussion from our health officials that are trying to put these kind of things on us. And let's be clear, the government did infringe on our rights. The Bill of Rights was infringed on. It specifically includes the Health Act, and the Health Act specifically includes it now. It should not have happened, but the courts have allowed it to happen. So we have to stop the courts from allowing it to happen in the future. And, if let's say there's an infringement, you know how it is with governments. If they see political ramification in the future for themselves, that they can't hide behind cabinet confidences or all those other little secret documents they like to hide behind. If they can't hide behind public officials and they have to put those public officials out in front of the public to answer questions on a periodic basis, like weekly, and make sure MLAs have the opportunity to play politics with that as far as making sure that there is a clear transparency and accountability with their health officials. And then after the fact, if there is need and if there is infringement, then we have to have a judicial inquiry automatically. And then in certain cases, a public inquiry, like in this case. If there's a multi-month infringements on our rights, we have to get to the bottom of it, and people have to be held accountable. You also know, and most Albertans don't know this, that even though we can bind ourselves more so than the Charter of Rights does in Alberta, the difficulty we do have is that future governments can unbind us. And that's why the more complicated the bind is, the more we put into the emergency laws, the more we put those little things that only lawyers and, let's face it, geeks like you and I think about, is the opportunity to bind and to make them recognize they're going to pay a significant price if they make that decision. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the only thing we can do, and that's what we have to do. But certainly judges, we can bind them through an interpretation provision. I'm positive that will work.
Oh, that's a very interesting way of putting things, and it certainly speaks to how dangerous it is, in my respectful view, the idea that the NDP would be restored again under Rachel Notley is that they absolutely, that seems to be the one thing that all the candidates who are running for the leadership of your party agree upon, the absolute vital importance of winning that election. And I think that's a big part of what the people who are going to, decide the leadership race are looking at. Who's the one who could ensure that the Notley dragon is slayed.
Well, I will tell you, I have the most experience dealing with her on a day in, day out basis, and dealing with her over the fires and different situations. I know how to beat her. Last time, just barely missed that opportunity to win. And then there was two other parties, and we had the juggernaut, Jim Prentice, and the PC party at that time that was in government. So we had a lot against us at that time. This time with the UCP and myself and Rachel Notley and the NDP, I'm very confident that we're going to be able to win the hearts and minds of Albertans right across the province.
I certainly hope so. What is your sense of how the campaign is going? Obviously, based upon the leadership debates, the impression is that you and Danielle Smith and Mr. Taves are the three front runners. There was a recent debate. What was your sense of how that went? Was that a success for you, or what did you learn from debating the other candidates? I noticed in the last one I watched it, it got a little hot at times. What was your sense of that process?
I thought it was good. I thought it was feisty and possible. It was hard to really talk. The crowd was very loud, so it felt like we had to shout up at the front, even though most people in TV land didn't feel that way. They felt we were actually shouting, and we weren't. It was hard to hear ourselves. I thought the debate was pretty good. I thought Derek was very good. I know I got feisty a couple of times. I don't like people talking in fantasy. There was a question about foreclosure law, and I worked in foreclosure law. I mean, the credit union is not going to ignore a demand from Revenue Canada to not send their money to Revenue Canada. We're not going to be able to appoint illegal judges. We're not going to be able to collect our own taxes. And I mean, you're going to get arrested for tax evasion. The federal government's not going to do that. I spent 10 years in Ottawa as a parliamentarian. I know what they're all about, and I know how to deal with them. And frankly, we need to deal with them very, very carefully, because we have one opportunity to do this right, and to get to the table and have a good discussion about where we should be in Alberta. And I believe if we act like mature adults and don't make up stories, we can get there and do what is laid out in the law. We don't have to ask for a divorce and hit the nuclear button. We can talk about what things bring us together and how do we find the compromise to get past some of our difficulties. And there is a clear indication that Albertans are not happy with the current situation. That's why we have the 62% referendum.
Well, I'm very encouraged to hear you talk about doing something about that referendum, because this is obviously something that really was largely responsible for Mr. Kenney's failure as leader. That he had a clear mandate through that equalization referendum and did nothing with it. In fact, worse than nothing, he ignored it. He really ignored the will of Albertans. So what would you do? What's your plan for taking that mandate and doing something with it?
Well, Leighton, I'm glad you brought that up. As you, I hope, know, I was the one responsible as the leader of the Wildrose to bring that equalization study to the forefront. We spent some time on that, and Albertans, as a result, were shocked to find out how much money we'd actually been sending to Ottawa and how much money has not been coming back from Ottawa in the way of services or goods or whatever it is that we need in Alberta, and we need a lot. And so then the referendum was also something I announced, and I said I would do that. Jason Kenney, thankfully, he pushed that forward because it did become policy of that party. And so we got the opportunity to have that referendum. And what I would do, well, in 2 months, you can find out if I get elected as premier. On day number 1, I'm going to send a Section 46 legal notice to the premiers and the prime minister, letting them know that we want to open up the Constitution and get to discussions. And, for those people that say, no, you can't open the Constitution, which there was a constitutional amendment this year for Saskatchewan. That's right, a constitutional amendment. And we could get the same one here in Alberta. It's about CP rail paying taxes or not, but that's not the point. The point is the Constitution is a living document. It's there for the people of the country. That means Albertans too. And it's supposed to reflect the needs and the desires of the people of the country. So if we go to the table, we can get what we want, and we might not get everything we want, but I think it's going to be a lot better than what we get now.
Right. So the idea is to open a conversation. Worst case scenario would be, at least identifying the problem, making Ottawa aware, and perhaps even gaining some leverage.
I think it goes beyond that. I think we need to. I think it goes beyond a conversation. We need to get in a formal setting. That's why it's a legal notice, and it's going to be treated as such. We need to get in a formal setting. The Supreme Court of Canada, in paragraph 69, I think 79, 69 set out the specific instructions on how a jurisdiction, a region needs to go through the process. And we need to make sure the government knows. And that's why I want to make it clear now that this is not a discussion. This is a legal notice. This is getting to the table. This is surrounding ourselves with the table. And if they aren't going to go to the table, well, guess what? Then CPP immediately set up our own plan, give the 2 years notice. We are then going to do EI the same way. We're going to do a provincial police force the same way. We are going to autonomize the province of Alberta and the people of Alberta from Ottawa. We are going to do whatever it takes to get to the table because we need to do that. And remember, they're going to want to do that because our pension plan contributes a significant portion more than other provinces, and so does our unemployment insurance.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that. And my understanding is the numbers are as high as $3 billion per year net contribution. Some other numbers I have here on equalization. This is from a couple of years ago. That of course Alberta receives nothing. A certain province in Canada has received $221 billion.
I think that's Quebec. If you don't have that in front of you, I'm pretty sure I got that memorized. Yeah, you should see some of the infrastructure there. Huh?
Oh, it's amazing. Incredible.
Yeah, they you know, take a lot of money.
Yeah, and it's not just equalization. That's one of the problems, but another problem I know that you've expressed concern about is the cost of things, inflation. I see that actually Candace Bergen, the interim leader of the Federal Conservative Party, recently posted on Twitter that gas has increased almost 55% in the last year, natural gas 26%, transportation 17%, water, fuel, and electricity over 14%, food purchased from stores almost 10%, baby food 7%, toiletry items and cosmetics 6%. So really, there is something very, very dire about this situation, not only for Albertans, but really for all Canadians in terms of these disastrous economic policies. And so it sounds as though when you talk about autonomy, part of that is to try and shield and protect Albertans from some of these disastrous economic policies that the federal government is engaged in.
Exactly, and that's why I suggested one of the other campaign promises that I've made is to make sure our oil and diesel, our gas, is royalty free for Albertans. So there's almost 400,000 barrels a day that are consumed by Albertans, and we would remove all of the royalties on that so that Albertans wouldn't be paying a royalty on what they own, which would reduce the cost per liter about 15 cents under the current situation. We'd make the fuel tax permanently gone, which would mean under current situation about another 25 cents a liter would come off. And for me, the big part about that is, remember, all this inflation is a lot of it is caused by the price of fuel, because all your vegetables, all of your food stuff, all of your appliances and living room furniture, they're all come in by truck and train and other things that use gas and diesel. So that's what's driving the price up of everything for the most part. And that's why I suggested that we bring that down right away. And I just like to say, you know what would happen if we could do that permanently and make gas and diesel permanently royalty free? We would have a situation where we would have the least expensive fuel in Canada. We would attract all the transportation companies to use Alberta as a hub. We'd attract airlines to make Alberta a hub. We would have a tremendous opportunity to bring people in to create growth and do so through just offering Albertans something that was already theirs. The profit on and the royalty on oil and gas and diesel. And that's what I think is important, is recognizing that if that money stays in Albertans' pockets, if it doesn't come into the government, because let's face it, the government's flush with cash now, it's Albertans who don't have money. But if it doesn't come into the government's pockets, it lowers the fiscal capacity of the government of Alberta, which in turn means that we send less money out to our friends in Quebec, which is my ultimate goal, to keep all the money here in Alberta, even if the government has none. If the Albertans have everything, I'm fine with that.
That sounds almost like a libertarian type of approach, with at the risk of giving it a label. But I certainly like the idea.
I think people making their own choices is very important, and autonomy is very important. But we have services that we have to provide to people, and that includes healthcare, justice, all of those wonderful things that we love here in Alberta. So libertarian society, although to some people it might sound like a utopian situation, it's not the reality. But people having opportunity to be libertarians with their own lives. That's what I'm all about. The autonomous self-determination, self-choosing. I think that's how people make for stronger communities. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. You're the one that we want to hear from. Brian, you've also recently published some ideas about how to protect Alberta agricultural business as well, because obviously recently the federal government announced restrictions on things like fertilizer use and production and availability, which is going to impose severe hardship on Alberta farmers, and even some people are saying could lead to food shortages. And you published some ideas about how to protect Alberta from these policies. One of them was to establish a cross-commodity, geographically representative advisory board of grassroots farmers and ranchers to help the Premier and the Minister of Agriculture enhance the growth of potential and competitiveness of the sector. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I just think that for too long, we have ministers and premiers that, are talking to the large corporate farms and maybe some people that might be removed from some of the more pressing issues that we're dealing with right now, like cow-calf production and the opportunity for that industry to stay in Alberta, like 30% increase in fertilizer or the decrease in fertilizer use by the federal government, which will mean definitely, in my opinion, food shortage. And I think we need to take a very serious look at who's buying up our farms and who's buying up our farmland, and make sure that it's Albertans as much as possible that own our grazing leases, and not people from other provinces or other countries. I really think we need to focus on maybe having a little bit more of an Alberta flavor on our decisions. I would say that, and that means we have to have more competition in our cow-calf slaughterhouses, or else we're not going to have the opportunity to have that industry. We need to make sure that we have the ability to grow barley in the future, even though right now we're not depending on it as much for our cow-calf industry as we used to, and I think we will be again. That means that 30% less fertilizer we have to say no to. And what a Brian Jean-led government would do is invest in the provincial fertilizer companies that currently produce fertilizer and make a made in Alberta solution to that, so we can avoid the jurisdictional issues with the federal government, and try to have it so that it's a fertilizer that works well for Albertans and Alberta farms, and a made in Alberta solution for Albertans. Same as the slaughterhouse capacity. We have to be more competitive there. We have to make sure that we keep that industry alive, because that's food security, folks. And I think that's one of the most important issues, and not given near enough attention by our governments, all levels.
Right. Obviously, a very important industry for Alberta and really all of Canada.
Absolutely.
As I listened to the debates, Brian, one of the points of distinction between your campaign and that of Danielle Smith seems to be on this question of the environment. Obviously, the federal government, I shouldn't say obviously, it's my particular view that our federal government is really waging an ideological war and using non-scientific climate hysteria to impose certain economic policies. When I listen to Danielle Smith, she talks about net zero hydrogen and so on, and to me that seems to presume that there is a man-made, a human manufactured climate a catastrophe. As I listen to you in your campaign, you don't seem to subscribe to that. Is that a fair characterization, or what is your view on the quote unquote climate scare?
Well, I think Paris is a great place to visit, but I think they should keep their own climate solutions over there. I don't think, I'm not going to ignore the world. I definitely think there's issues going on that we need to deal with, but we've got a ton of issues right here in Alberta that we need to focus on, and reducing the food output of one of the safest places in the world to grow food and supply food to the world, which we do a lot of, wheat especially, is frankly ludicrous. And I'm not going to follow that kind of science ever. And to suggest that we have to, go to a one world situation where nobody local owns farmland, and it's owned by one big or two big billionaires out of the US or wherever, I don't care where, that is another ludicrous scenario for me. We need to be seriously thinking about our food security and food safety here in Alberta. And the closer we are to the products that we eat, the better off the product quality and the better off our bodies respond to it. So I'm all about making sure that we keep our farms thriving and profitable, because if we don't, we're going to, I think, look behind us and be very uncomfortable with what's in front of us.
This is something that for me is hard to appreciate, this whole climate scare. I was looking at some data today that said that all of Canada is only contributes about 1.6 of the carbon emissions globally, and that China is increasing its carbon emissions every year by at least half that much. It seems kind of a pointless exercise. And then, of course, there are some people, some very, very reputable climate scientists who, like, for example, like Dr. Patrick Moore, former head of Greenpeace, who say that actually our biggest concern is the Earth cooling, and that the Earth actually needs more carbon. So it's encouraging to hear that at least one of the candidates is not, signing on to this, and is sort of tacitly buying into the whole climate ideology, the World Economic Forum, UN Agenda 2030. And especially the thing that bothers me too, and I appreciate hearing from you on this, since you're from Fort McMurray. It's clear to me that Alberta is perhaps the cleanest energy producer in the entire world.
It is.
That's a story that is just not told enough. We have all the Leonardo DiCaprios of the world talking about dirty oil from Fort McMurray. That really is a load of rubbish, isn't it?
I can't even say enough about Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, the guy's he good actor, good actor. And you know what? That's exactly why we shouldn't elect actors as our politicians. The truth is that we do oil and oil production better than anybody on the planet. We should be very proud of it. I lived in Fort McMurray my entire life. And, a lot of people don't know this because I didn't complete it. I ran out of money as a student, but I'm only 3 or 4 classes away from a master's in environmental law. My hope at one time was to save the earth by, practicing law and doing what was necessary. And I studied a lot about acid rain in those days and other things, because I am that old. But I recognized early on that we do it better here and what we can do. And I think that's why it's not a waste of time what we've done so far. It's not a waste of time to empower and energize our men and women of our oil and gas sector, because they are so creative and they're so innovative. They are able to produce most of the technological advances of the last many years in the mining industry, for sure. I think the Fort McMurray area produces more patents than anywhere else in Canada for changes to things to make them better. So we are very good at what we do. I just think that what we should do is really just focus on doing it. And that doesn't mean I don't believe in climate change. You're right. We're just over 1%, 1.5% here. And what we can do with all of these men and women that create these amazing inventions and all this technology that is helping us here far more than anybody else, far more than we should actually do, to be honest, based upon what the rest of the world is doing, for sure. But what we can do is we can send that technology for free, and a Brian Jean government would send it for free. And I know some people say no, but the sooner we get those people on board, the less the world is going to penalize ourselves. And we have to find a way to get some sort of, something back for it. But we need to get that technology over there, because that technology could truly go more to save our planet than anything else that China and India and the United States are going to come up with. It's going to be the men and women of the oil and gas sector that come up with great ideas on how to go to net zero, if that's what they decide, or whatever else the industry wants to do that moves us in that direction, but moves the world in that direction, not just our industry. Penalizing ourselves for what the rest of the world, dreams of is not a good thing from my perspective. So let's focus on real change, what really makes things better. And I think that net zero is, pie in the sky from Paris that is just not beneficial to us.
Yeah. Your idea of donating technology actually is an intriguing one, and I've heard it presented in a book by a man named Bjorn Lomborg. You might be familiar with him. He wrote a
Mm.
book called False Alarm, and he agrees with you. He says that actually until individual GDP gets to about $3,000 per year, people don't care about the climate. But by sharing technology, it boosts GDP. And once you get people who are beyond subsistence level, they become more environmentally conscious, and
Mhm.
and frankly, it raises them out of poverty, which to me is, as you say, is I guess a better way of producing or wealth for the entire planet, wealth and health for the entire planet. This idea of sharing technology, but it's one that I don't hear many people talking about. Unfortunately, it's more everything is sort of shifted towards trying to discover who are the climate villains and penalizing them. And unfortunately, that penalty seems to be paid by ma and pa average, and not by governments and not by large corporations. Um,
Uh, it's establishing a war room. Um, I just don't think that that's beneficial. As much as it sounds great, it's not beneficial to the greater good of the marketing. It's just like sort of approving a coal mine that brings in $20 million a year and getting a black eye for the world to visualize our oil sands industry, which brings in, you know,
mhm,
trillions of dollars over a period of time.
mhm,
It's just not even, sometimes you have to make decisions that are political in the best interest of the people. And
mhm.
it's tough, but you have to do it.
There was a recent piece in the Western Standard that described you as the most experienced, most organized, and most meticulous on the details. That was talking about both you and your campaign manager. But they also said that gave the opinion that people had not heard nearly enough about you in the leadership race, and that there's been too much attention on some of the other candidates. And Mr. Kennedy seems to be partly responsible for this because recently he took time out on a radio station to criticize Danielle Smith. What's your take on that? I mean, I thought I had heard Mr. Kennedy to say that he wasn't going to get involved in the race, but here he is, chiming in. What's your take on that? Do you think that the premier should just sort of keep quiet and butt out and let the race carry on without his involvement, or what's your view there? I'm curious to know.
Well, first of all, that wasn't a block and pivot, honest. Let's not forget who Mr. Kenney is. He's one of the most experienced and professional politicians in our time. Definitely in this century, he'll go down as one of the best talkers in both official languages, federally and provincially. He's amazing. So he has a tremendous amount of federal experience, and he did have some tough portfolios, which he was very experienced in. And he recognizes that the federal government and the changes to the federal government and the relation and the changes between the relation of the federal and provincial governments is not going to be done overnight with one bill that you're going to put out there. And that one bill is just a signal to investors to say adios amigos. So especially if you're not bringing that bill forward, which I'm glad to see that he's asked for it, and I think that's what Miss Danielle Smith should do, is bring forward the Sovereignty Act. She's talked about it. She's brought forward 4 or 5 pieces that have frankly scared me, a couple of them, only because I know that the foreign investment climate is very, very important, and volatility does not help it, because foreign investment creates jobs, and we need foreign investment here. And I don't mean over on the other side of the world, but just the US and other provinces need to have companies that want to come in here because the climate's good to invest in, and stability gives them that investment climate. So I think it's very important to not lose sight of that, and to recognize that the best thing that she can do is bring it forward so we could have clarity. Because right now we've just got out 3 or 4 things in one word, and those 3 or 4 things scare some people. And Christy Clark, what did she say? I don't remember what she said, but it was something like she said. Anyways, she said something not very flattering about it, and I think several people did, because they've been there. They've been in Ottawa. They've been premiers. They've been involved in the political process, and they understand you cannot do it simply by throwing out one piece of legislation and talking about things. You have to, if you're going to put out a piece of legislation, let's see it. Let's see what it looks like so that we can measure it accordingly. And if it's hot, it's important that the members see it before they have a vote, because right now all we have is a couple stories about what it might have and might not have.
Well, Christy Clark's comment, if I read it correctly, was that the Sovereignty Act was batshit crazy. You were much more diplomatic in your assessment.
I remembered halfway through my memory. Oh, I don't want to say that.
But you said something that I think makes a lot of sense. You said, well, you know what, everybody, we should be able to read it. Yeah. What does it actually look like? Let's actually roll this out before. And I think you said every Albertan should read it, especially the ones who are going to be voting in the leadership race, right?
You're a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. And you've got much more constitutional experience than I have. I litigated for 10 years in the courts, but my litigation was, well, you know what kind of litigation it was. Some ugly and some okay, but I learned a lot. And what I learned was read the law. It's right there in black and white in front of you. Read it. Section 46. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what it's got. You can read it. It's in plain English language. It took me a lot longer. I would have been happier to have a D average in high school, to be honest. It took me a lot longer than most to learn, to work, study and work. And when I first went into law school, I discovered that, wow, all you have to do is really sit down and force yourself to read it. Just force yourself to go through it. If you have to go through it 10 times or 20 times to get the meaning, and then just, find the books that explain it, because there's always going to be legal journals that will talk about what the interpretation is. And when you look at Section 46 and you look at the paragraph 69 of the case, the reference case in Quebec, you see clearly, here's the path. Let's go down the path. Fortunately, Danielle Smith, I have to admit, though, she did the last two debates we had, the one in Calgary and the one I think it was in Vegreville. She did say that Brian's right. We probably do have to open up the Constitution, but I know I'm right, because that's the only solution. Right? We're in an agreement. This is the contract. Let's sit down and talk about the contract and how we get to a different place in the contract, because some of the members that are covered by the contract are not happy. Oh, look, the Supreme Court of Canada allows us to have the rules. So I'm kind of excited about that opportunity. Some people seem surprised by it. I was not.
So just to sort of summarize that, it sounds as though you and Danielle Smith would agree on the idea that Alberta needs more sovereignty, more control over its own destiny, but you disagree about the path to get there. You don't agree that the Sovereignty Act is the way to go. In fact, what you're saying is that there's another better mechanism that already exists, and that's the Canadian Constitution Act.
Well, what I'm saying is I haven't seen anything about our Sovereignty Act. I've heard 3 or 4 points that are distracting, to say the least, frightening possibly. What I know is in black and white that has been there since the Constitution has been there, has been Section 46, and has clearly enunciated what path we have to take. And I know that no matter what piece of legislation Danielle Smith comes forward, it can be called Sovereignty Act, it can be called Mumbo Jumbo Act, it can be called the Alberta Superior Forever Act, it can be called anything. But if I don't see it and I don't have it, I can't tell you what it is. And I know for sure, no matter what act she puts out there, she still has to get to my process before anything's going to happen. So all she can do, and all any of the candidates do, Travis Daves as well, is talk about all these other things. But the truth is, they all have to come to the Constitution sooner or later. So why not just get to the Constitution?
Right.
Why not just join me in this battle that I've been waging since 2015? That's what people don't remember, is I've been doing this since 2015. That's why I came up with the equalization referendum, because that's the tool that we need to open the Constitution, to get in there and pry it open, because it's going to take some prying. And the other premiers are there now. I don't think the Prime Minister's there, but I think we can drag him to the table kicking and screaming. I'd like to do that. And I think we can. The other premiers are there right now. They want more health funding. They want a different deal on cross boundaries and borders. They want a different deal, and so do
I. Dr. Dennis Modry, you probably know, he's the CEO of the Alberta Prosperity Project, and he agrees with you in large degree in that the APP sees this idea of the Sovereignty Act as really as an invitation to a constitutional crisis.
It is,
which could be very detrimental, perhaps even disastrous for Alberta. And so there's agreement there. I know that on August 25th, you're one of the candidates who's going to be participating, I believe, in a scheduled debate that is going to be sponsored by the APP. What would you say to those people, let's say the 30% that you described earlier, who really believe that the only path forward for Alberta, the only way to sort of escape the tyranny of the government in Ottawa, is through independence, as opposed to more sovereignty within confederation. What do you say to those people? How would you try and win them over?
You have to come to the Constitution anyway. Like, you want to separate? Well, you can't separate without going to the Constitution. You want more autonomy? You can't get more autonomy without going to the Constitution. You want to have a leader that's going to respect that and actually follow through with what they say? That's Brian Jean. I will get you more autonomy in Alberta for Albertans, and I will make sure that Ottawa is held to account. I know how to deal with them. I've dealt with them for 10 years, and I know that we can. I don't want to send our business community scurrying. I don't want to send signals that happened in Quebec to close down industries. What I want to do is show the world that we are a leader in confederation, that Alberta is here. We are strong, and we have mighty powers, and we do. We have tremendous financial powers through CPP and EI, and we have tremendous financial powers through taking back a lot of our autonomy through different methods. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. People talk about a provincial police force. Well, my fear right now is that we don't have enough police. I don't want to get in a situation where we all of a sudden send a signal to the RCMP and say, we don't want you here in Alberta anymore. And so they all vacate and go to other places because they know it's inevitable. I want to make sure the RCMP recognize that they're a valuable part of our communities, where they are and where they're wanted. Isn't that about autonomy? Having the freedom to choose in our communities, whether it's Three Hills or Vegreville or Calgary or Edmonton or Lethbridge or Fort McMurray. They should be able to decide for themselves what's the police force they want. If we have the RCMP already set up and they have the international connections with CSIS and the FBI and all the other organizations that are across the world, why would we pay to get that back? We already paid for it probably 50 times, but let's say once. We already paid for all that stuff. So we're going to have, no matter what happens, 500 RCMP officers in Alberta. That's the truth. Right now we have about 3,000, 3,400. But 500 are going to stay here even if we have our own provincial police force. And I don't have a problem with the provincial police force. What I have a problem with is reducing the amount of officers that we have on the streets right now, because we need more, not less. And we need officers that don't just stop you for a traffic ticket. We need officers that can investigate, can solve crimes, can pursue. I mean, the first thing I would do as premier, after the sending notice to the other premiers, is change the pursuit laws in Alberta so people can pursue criminals. Like the idea that criminals aren't pursued and they know that they're not pursued is, in my opinion, negligent. We need to send a message that if you steal, if you are a criminal, that you are caught and that you face prosecution. And when you go in front of the judge holds you to account and you go to jail. And you spend some time in jail and you try to get reformed and educated, which is the only way that we can get around this situation. And we make sure that we have the mental health supports that they need and the physical health supports they need and the education supports they need, because there is a huge cost on society for criminals and people don't recognize it, but there's a huge cost, and it goes beyond just the yearly cost in incarceration. It goes beyond that. It goes to the very community, and we need to build up those people in our community, not tear them down. So doesn't mean we let them get away with it, though. Yeah, that's for sure.
No, what you're saying is that there is a connection between law and order, and we do need the law to preserve and restore order, and we're in danger of losing that. Yeah, no, that's a foundational conservative concept. I get that one totally. There's a recent poll, Brian, it was done by Polling Canada. The question was, Justin Trudeau often favors certain groups and regions of the country over others, which has created national unity issues. Very shocking results. Maybe not for people like us in Alberta, but this is a national poll. And 61% of the people agreed with that. Only 22% disagreed. That means that 6 in 10 Canadians agree that Justin Trudeau favors certain regions over others. To me, this is really shocking, and it begs the question about, what kind of country are we living in? How is our country being governed when we have a federal government that seems to be targeting certain areas of the country for discriminatory treatment? I would say Alberta and the West, in particular Alberta, Saskatchewan, and then others that seem to be able to do whatever they like. For example, Quebec. Is this part of the constitutional question that you want to have examined? Is this part of what you would try to achieve through the constitutional notices, putting an end to this type of discriminatory treatment?
I don't think it's going to ever stop. What surprises me is that there's 22% of the people that have been living under a rock and don't recognize Justin Trudeau's tearing our country apart. That's what I don't get. I mean, what do you guys like? Do you not read a newspaper? Do you not see this man and what he does to our country and to the people? Anyways, I'm not going to get into it. I had the opportunity to serve with this gentleman in Ottawa, and I can't think of anybody that's less qualified to run our province, our country, and make the decisions for us than he is. I'm astonished that he's still there, and I'm hoping he's gone and never comes back. The truth is that we have to change the deal. We have to change the deal in the Senate, so we can't have pipeline bans or tanker bans. This deal in the Senate has to be the ability to quash, much like the U.S. has. We have to change, and Australia, I might add, and other countries that saw our example and changed it to make it better. Our example is bad. Our senators have to stop being appointed. They need to be elected, and we need to get that into the Constitution. That's one of the things we need to do. We need to make sure we get our pipelines across jurisdictional borders. Kazakhstan right now, as an independent country, has more rights to go over its enemies' territories than we do over British Columbia's or Saskatchewan's. That's got to stop, and we need to deal with that in the Constitution. If they're not going to let us, then they stop getting money. They stop getting stuff from us. It's simple. And we need to get at the table to do that. And, I personally say this to you, if I'm elected premier, I'll be dealing with those negotiations directly. I will be in the room dealing with them because I know how it works. I know how bureaucrats give things up. I'm not going to give up on this. This is our one opportunity. And that's what I want to be clear of. People think, oh, let's just get a question in front of the people to separate. How many of those do you think we're going to get over the next century? 2 centuries? You think we're going to get 1? Maybe. How many have we had over the last century? How about 0? So let's do this right. Let's have the discussion. Let's get to the point where we can have a educated, smart discussion about how to move forward. And let's not take anything off the table, because what it is it's about outcomes. And we know we need to improve healthcare. We know that justice only comes to you often if you have money. We know that our education system has become a bureaucratic nightmare where we get ideology that goes left and then right. And who's stuck in the middle? Our kids. We know we need to make that parents in charge. We know we've got so many different issues in rural Alberta, whether it's infrastructure or linear taxation or being ignored by the federal government and the provincial government in our programming, which they do. And I've talked to many not-for-profits that are just not getting enough money to survive right now and working long hours without any benefit to them. I mean, these are the NGOs, the non-government organizations that support our communities, like food banks and homeless shelters and, all of these different groups that are being left at the sidelines. It's, our government needs to shape up, and it's truthfully, they think that it's going to be about, a lot of politicians think it's about telling people what to do. Bureaucrats in particular, bureaucrats or the service. It's not, it's about empowering them, making them feel like they're part of the team. And we're all doing this together. We're rowing in the boat in the same direction, because what? We have to fix healthcare. We have to fix our justice system. We have to put our education system back where it was. We have to give people confidence in their government, their premier. We have to get them to like us and believe in us. And most importantly, trust us to make good decisions for them. Because my goodness gracious, if we've learned nothing over the last 2 years, we've learned that our government has far too much power over us. And we need to limit that. And if I get the chance, I'm going to limit future. I'm not just going to not do lockdowns for the people of Alberta if I'm premier. I'm going to not do lockdowns, and I'm going to put things that are permanent in place so that governments have to jump through a lot of hoops and manipulate a lot of things in order to get to where they want to put lockdowns again, and also make all of that public, so that they better be right, because if they're not, they're going to pay a big price, not in a year or 2 years or 3 years, but immediately. And that's why we need to keep transparency and accountability on the healthcare industry and make sure that the Health Act does not supersede our personal rights. And I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen. And as a lawyer, you can create chaos in the legislation a bit to force people not to do things.
Brian, you've been very generous with your time, and I'm very grateful for it. I want to ask you one more question. Really,
is this the tough one you told me was coming?
No, I think you have an answer for it, but I think people need to hear this from you.
Okay.
There's probably no other topic that is of more concern to Albertans right now than healthcare, because of what we've gone through over the past couple of years. I looked at some stats recently which show that among the industrialized nations, Alberta is paying some of the highest cost for healthcare, and yet among those nations, we're near the bottom in terms of quality of care. So this is obviously something that is of tremendous concern to Albertans. And it's heightened by, when we see the $230,000 bonus to Dr. Hinshaw, whom, many people see as, and I'm one of them, see it really as a villain of the pandemic. So what would you do? What steps would you take as Premier to improve the quality of care and to reduce the cost of healthcare for Albertans?
Well, first of all, I think you should not look at her as a villain. She couldn't do anything without the government enabling her to do so. She was not I'm sorry, I don't think the decisions she gave I was not overly impressed with the communication and some of the other things. I thought she should have been held to account every week at a table across the table from MLAs. And I thought she should have answered questions for 2 or 3 hours at least, and her associates. And then we could have got to the truth of it and found out that a lot sooner that some of this stuff was not necessary. I think that's the for sure on that. Government's important, and what governments decide our lives. And that's why it's so important to make sure we get the right people in charge of our lives. And I think if you pick the right people right now, you get the right decisions later. And if you pick the wrong people right now, then you get the wrong decisions, and it's very hard to pry them out, as we've seen, because some people don't want to go. I would suggest that the best indicator of the future is to look at the past and how people perform on decision making when there's huge pressure on them will usually indicate how they will work out in the future. And that's why I think it's very important that people look at the resume of the people. And I'm not just saying because I'm a lawyer, I don't think you should hire just a lawyer. I'm saying that you should hire the person that has the passion and purpose. Now let's talk about that, because the question is healthcare. Now, I came back from federal politics thinking I was done from politics, thinking I was all finished and I was retired and I can go back to my family in Fort McMurray and my businesses in McMurray and spend time traveling. And my son getting sick and dying changed my passion and purpose. Now I want to fix healthcare. So my son got a test, and that test was when he first went into the hospital after being rejected 3 times by the hospital, telling him he wasn't sick, because cancer sometimes works in waves, right? So he drove himself to the Edmonton hospital because he was so concerned about how he was feeling. And he was not a drug user, or he was a very healthy young man, 24 years old. And what ultimately happened is we sat in the hospital and watched him die for 5 months. And they did a test on his nose. And the test was they checked to see if there was cancer there, and they checked to see if there was cancer there. And there wasn't any there. There was here. But unfortunately, they took this picture and they copied it on both sides. And so when people looked at the test in the future, doctors in particular, they said, no, we did that test already, and he doesn't have it. So, well, then because they change doctors every 2 weeks in the University of Alberta Hospital, every 2 weeks a new one comes in with a fresh set of eyes, I guess. I'm not sure why. But then they have to relearn my son's case, as I sat across and lived with him for that 6 months or 5 months. And during that period of time, 2 doctors came in and said, you know what, we should get that test done again, because that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Let's get that test done again. And then the next 2 doctors came in and said, oh, we don't need to do that test. It's $1,000. And I don't have that much money for testing. It costs $10,000 a day in ICU for my son, but that doesn't seem to be an indication of any need. Because why? Because we have the infrastructure and we don't account for it in the use for our people. We don't have any kind of accountability or transparency. And you know what gets me mad even more so than all of that is the fact that I would have paid for anything, first of all. And I wasn't trying to rely on the healthcare, but I was trying to fight to do things that I couldn't. And I think the operator that did that doesn't even know to this day that they did that. The only way I found out was I had to hire a lawyer that cost me $100,000, a lot of money. I had to get the money together to do it. Jeff Champion, a great lawyer here in Edmonton, does medical malpractice. And I got him to do the investigation. I wanted to know what happened to my son because I knew they screwed up. And they apologized to me, but what good does that do? You can't get money from them. So what can I do instead? Passion and purpose. I want to fix our healthcare system.
That's a very compelling story. Very sorry for your loss, Brian. But we're so grateful to have you here, and to listen
Thanks for
to.
the time.
Your passion is palpable. I want to leave off on that note, but before you go, we have a portion of the show that we call the reading list. And I'm going to go first, and I'm going to ask you, if you like, to recommend a book or a website or something like that where people can learn more about you, learn more about your campaign, perhaps improve their understanding of some of the things you've been talking about today. The book that I'm going to refer people to is called Moment of Truth, How to Think of Alberta's Future. You're probably familiar with this. It's written by some Albertans, Jack Mintz, Ted Morton, and Tom Flanagan, who you probably know from your time in the Wildrose Party. I'm sure you do. And this book was written in 2020, actually during the COVID-19, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was published, and it's described as Alberta's at a crossroads. Its situation in Canadian Confederation is unfair. It is unequal. So what comes next? What Westerners ultimately need to decide is if the best response to that unfairness and inequality is to leave Canada and the great Northwest, to carve out a smaller but separate country, or do we simply need to clearly define what would constitute a genuine fair deal, not just for Alberta, but for all Canadians who share our values and perspectives on what this country should be? Moment of Truth is a series of provocative, thoughtful, and timely essays curated by three of Canada's most respected and original political thinkers, debating whether we should pursue the Little Western Path via another division of the Northwest, this time via secession, or march along the Big Western Path aimed at nothing less than fairness for ourselves and everyone else through a reconfederation, which is one way of describing, I think, what you're talking about, Brian, as a reconfiguration of Alberta's relationship within Confederation. So I chose that book because it seemed to capture a bit of the essential debate that's going on within the leadership race right now. So where can people find you and learn more about you, Brian, and your campaign?
I keep it simple, brianjean.ca. Facebook is a good mechanism. I put a lot of stuff on there, but brianjean.ca, I have 24 articles that I've written over the last 4 years on where I would be on an assortment of different issues. I really believe that, one thing people should recognize from all of this, and from the book that you just mentioned, and other books that are on the topic and other issues on the topic, there's only one place that is the great catch basin, and that's the Constitution of Canada. And I invite people to go and look at it. Look at Section 46, look at Section 91 and 92 and the division of powers, and look at the reference case out of Quebec, and look at paragraph, I think, 69 or 79. You'll see that there's a direct path on how Albertans air their grievances, and no different than a husband and wife or a couple that is aggrieved. The way to solve it is either go see the lawyer right away and hit the button, which is a divorce button. And that's exactly the same thing here. If you want to separate, you have to go through the Constitution to do it. So why don't we get to the Constitution, as I've been suggesting for years now? Let's get there. Let's open it up. Let's have the discussion about trying to find a path forward that is in agreement with all of the parties. We're not uneducated people anymore. We're not people 200, 300 years of back in the time. We have good communication. People are very aware of what's going on. We have the ability to decide our own fate as much as humanly possible. I think we should be in that position to do so. And that's called autonomy. That's called freedom of choice. And we can get to that point if we open up the Constitution and do all of this. It's a tool to get this where we need to go, and how to get there is just to follow the path laid out by the Supreme Court of Canada, not to talk about the Sovereignty Act, not all these other things, because all of these other issues still have to go to the constitutional table for negotiation before they can be settled, even separation. So let's get to the table as quickly as possible. That's why day one I've said I will send that legal notice, and it is a legal notice. It's like a statement of claim. Let me tell you, when you send one of those to people get pretty excited, and I think the federal government will get excited. They'll look back, and people may not even realize this. The federal government is going to look back, and they'll hear all these comments from Brian Jean. If I'm the premier, they'll hear all these other comments, and they'll recognize the path forward as either negotiation or I don't even want to say it, because it's, anarchy is not a good thing, and it's not good for any of us. And what we need to do is be mature adults at the table and have a good discussion about how to solve it. And that doesn't mean we give away the farm. All the other provinces want what we want right now, and they want autonomy. They want more decision-making within their own boundaries to make their own decisions for their people. And I agree with that 100%. I think most Albertans do. So elect me as the premier of this great province, and I will provide that to you.
Thanks, Brian. It's been a pleasure talking with you today. I hope that I get a chance to meet you on August 25th at the APP debate. But in any event, I wish you much continued success with your campaign. And thank you very much for sharing this time with us on Grey Matter today.
Thank you for your time, and thanks to all your listeners.
Thanks, Brian.